To so torej današnje misli z gostoma Jess in Alenom. Ker je Jess iz Anglije, bom zdaj preklopil na angliščino. So we'll switch to English now. Jess, welcome to Slovenia, welcome to Maribor. Alen, welcome back in Maribor, I will say. So we have like two super interesting guests today here. And it's like, like super crazy serendipity that they both they founded themselves in Maribor at the same week, right? It was like total coincidence. So it's great that we managed to pursue them to be guests at our community event here. Since we published some short descriptions about Alen and Jess already on our website, I presume that you know some things about them, but just for warming up and to kickstart this conversation, maybe from both of you, how would you describe yourself in like 3 words? What would be the 3 words that best describe you and your work? Let's see. Yeah, Jess. We are gentlemen, so
all right.
Yeah, we'll start with you.
Hi, I'm Jess, and I was worried initially I would have to work on my language skills very quickly for tonight. 3 words, I would go with optimistic, passionate, and a little bit frantic as well.
All right, a warm applause for Jess, please. Yeah. Okay. Alen?
Hi, I'm Alen, as most of you know, probably. I see a lot of my friends here. Yeah, nice to be back in my hometown. And 3 words to describe me. Probably pessimistic, curious, and hungry. But not in a literal sense.
I asked you if you ate something before, so come on. Yeah. Okay, so to better understand, the topic of today, talk or chat or however you call this, we'll go from to explain a little bit the background of the both guys. I mean, you will explain your background. So maybe, for a start, Jess, how did you, end up in the startup world? Well, so what are your first steps in the startup world, and and then maybe a little bit of, development of your career and the startups and everything. So we'll know the background, and then we can, discuss maybe the topic later.
Sure. So I'm from California originally, and I grew up in a family where my dad worked in a software company, and I thought it was so boring. I just wanted to get really far away from all of that. So I went to study in Chicago, which is a very cold part of the US, and found myself doing 1-year exchange to Scotland because I just wanted to go somewhere new. My Spanish wasn't strong enough to consider studying in a Spanish-speaking country, and Scotland was close to English, so that worked out. And while I was there, I started attending the events that I just found had interesting speakers and cool stories, and really were offering free food and a subsidized trip to Brussels, and that was the startup community. So I got sucked into some clubs there while I was a student, and when I moved back to the US, I missed it so much that I immediately returned. And that was nearly 11 years ago. When I graduated, I moved back to Scotland. I did a master's as the easiest way to get a visa to stay in the UK, which was an option at the time. And my master's was in science and technology, policy and management, which was very strange, and really I just needed the visa. It was brand new, and there were only 2 of us in the entire degree program, so still quite an emerging field at that time. And I found myself, as I was finishing my degree, just going to a lot of events. And at one event, I sat next to the chairman of a company launching a new medical device to help women check themselves for breast cancer. And in my family, we had a strong history of breast cancer, so I was just really interested in the product and passionate about the problem they were solving. And the next day, the chairman emailed me and said, hey, by the way, I know you're graduating in 1 week. We're actually looking to bring on someone to manage the product launch. Are you interested? So that was how I jumped in. It was all quite serendipitous, like just following one interesting thing, some free food, a subsidized trip, the events I found interesting, and showing up and starting conversations with people opened the door. So I've kind of been in the startup community ever since then. That was 2007. And at one point looked back and thought, oh my gosh, I tried to run far away from this thing my dad did, which I thought was so boring, and found myself right in the middle of a bunch of software companies that I found fascinating. So I apologized to him and thanked him actually for setting me off on that path unknowingly.
Cool. Thanks. Alen? Yeah, so, yeah, just start and I'll...
Yeah. So how did I get into startups? I guess, you know, I was not sure what I wanted to do, which is what a lot of people, I guess, end up in startups. I saw this emerging field of technology, like, I guess, like 7-8 years ago. I had an idea that I wanted to work in media for a long time. I worked a bit during my student years. Then I had an idea that I wanted to work in an agency, like in a creative agency. And I think while I was there, I kind of saw that a lot of companies that we were kind of doing, like my first agency experience was like basically a lot of brands were doing actually digital products. Mm-hmm. So I kind of felt like it's actually better to build products and have that as a product than to build digital products as a vehicle to basically acquire customers for your like random brand for, I don't know, food or whatever. Mm-hmm. So I kind of worked there with my friend. He's maybe even here. And then we kind of came up with a first idea that what we wanted to do. There was, I guess, like 8 years ago. And then we kind of started building this thing called Futur. I don't even know how to pronounce it anymore. And then that's how I kind of got to know you, Urban. And basically, we collected four really good friends that had different skill sets, and we applied for an incubator actually in London. We got very close to getting in, and this was like a very good experience for us in terms of learning all the things that you basically shouldn't do when you do a startup. And I think it came in a really great time because we were all very young. And at that point, there was not so many startups. We kind of all went into that field going forward. From there on, I worked mainly with digital products in one way or another, and kind of randomly ended up in Denmark, where I work for Pleo now.
Okay, and so from the future or whatever, how do you pronounce it? It was like a cool product. I mean, I like it very much, and I still feel pity that it didn't saw the light of the App Store or the Google Store. But anyway, what is the from the entering the almost made it into the accelerator in the London till head of marketing or outreach in Pleo? What happened in between? So just to get a sense what you have been doing in there.
Yeah, I basically met a lot of startups there. Most of us, all of 4 of us, actually went on and worked for startups. From there on, we didn't have any capital or anything to continue, and we were pretty young, and we just, we got pretty nice offers and so forth. So I kind of worked a bit for another startup that was actually incubated in London called Techstars. There's where I worked in the blend of media and technology. It was a pretty cool startup. And then I went back and worked for an agency for a while, building digital products for different brands. And then, I kind of wanted to move a bit. Didn't actually know where I wanted to go. But I just wanted to have an experience of going back to a startup because I've been working with a lot of different brands, and I felt like I got a lot of skills that I can kind of contribute. And then, very randomly, I met a friend who worked at Founders, and Founders is a startup studio and early stage VC in Copenhagen, funded by very wealthy Danish families. So yeah, my idea was to kind of build my own thing there, but I kind of advised with a few startups on growth, and then we basically invested in Pleo, and I kind of advised them for a few months, and then I was basically the first employee there. So we did a lot of like very, very early things in Pleo when it comes to acquisition, even before we had a product, which is just something that was very helpful for us.
Okay, cool. So and Jess, maybe from early experiences in the startup field and startup communities, and with your first, let's say, medical startup story, how did you end it? Working for Techstars for 7 or 8 years. What was the?
So I think some people have like a plan and a goal 5 to 10 years ahead that they're trying to line up their lives to move towards. That's not me. I'm just kind of 1 year at a time, what opportunity is there, and what am I enjoying, and do I like the people I'm with? So for me, I went from that medical company to another startup where my roommate's dad was an investor, and they needed someone to try to manage the launch for the US and Canada. And so my roommate's dad said, oh, I know someone who can do that for you, even though I was 22 or 23 and had no idea what I was doing. But I think we've all been in those sorts of situations. So joined that startup for about 1.5 years. I was commission only, so I wasn't making any money for a long time. And I was kind of working for a group that ran conferences and events in Scotland at the same time, because they needed someone part-time, so that worked for me. Then I could also pay my rent. And it was through organizing like weekend hackathons and some other events that I got to know this guy, John Bradford. And he knew me through a blog that my friends and I were running as well on like the Scotland startup community. And he was planning to set up a new accelerator program in Cambridge in the UK. And this was early 2011. So I got a 1-line email from him totally out of the blue, asking if I wanted to join him in running that. And after initially saying no, because I was like, look, I'm just starting to date someone in Scotland, like my whole life is here. I'm not gonna give that all up to just move to Cambridge on a whim. I decided to move to Cambridge for 3 months, and so we ran that accelerator program together 2011.
And this was Springboard, right?
Springboard Accelerator, yeah. And at that point, it was mostly just seed camp in the UK and not a whole lot else going on in the community. So I wound up staying in Cambridge another 2 years. We ran the program in Cambridge, in London. We did one accelerator just focused on mobile, back when being mobile first was like a big deal. I feel like now mobile isn't really like such a specific focus anymore. It's almost everyone. And then we did a program just focused on Internet of Things in 2013. And at that point, Techstars had reached out, and Techstars was only in the US then, and said, hey, we're looking to expand into Europe rather than start from scratch. You guys want to merge together and become Techstars London. So that was about 5 years ago. We thought, yeah, it would definitely be helpful to be part of a bigger family and a bigger network and have more resources and more connections for all of the startups we were working with. So yeah, 5 years ago, we all joined forces and we became Techstars London. The next year, we were looking to add a program focused on fintech, partnered with Barclays, and I got asked if I would switch across and focus on setting up and helping with that London program. And then the fintech relationship expanded to include New York, Tel Aviv, and South Africa. So I got asked if I would step out of the London role and work across setting up those 4. So I spent about 1 year of my life quite focused on South Africa and on a plane back and forth every 2 weeks. And then when all of those programs were set up, I got asked if I'd focus on the rest of our new plans outside of North America. So Australia, France, Germany, Dubai, Norway were kind of the main ones. I'd just been bouncing across and trying to help manage any of the new accelerators we were working on, but each opportunity kind of unfolded a bit by surprise. I wasn't aiming for that or really aiming for anything other than just enjoying and, I don't know, surviving the chaos I was in.
Okay. And just, before opening Techstars Maribor, you ended your role, right, in Techstars, right?
Shh.
All right.
We'll find out.
All right. So, now when we have the background of both guests, you see where the direction of the talk is going. So, Jess was managing the Techstars and the network of the Techstars in APEC and EMEA area, and Alen is the growth mastermind of the Pleo company. The Pleo startup, the Danish company. So these were basically the main starting point for today's discussion. So you are more than willing. Join or jump into the conversation if you have any questions. So just both are very friendly, as you see, so they don't bite. They're happy to ask the question. So if you, before I ask the next round of the question, just maybe you have any at the moment. Yet, not yet. No, yes, no, no. Martin is not here. Martin, are you here? Okay. Martin is like a regular guest in our talks, and he usually have the most of the question, And I used to start this conversation that I have a really I call it a wet dream, that the audience will have more questions that I will have, right? And I still didn't, fulfill these dreams yet. So I'm still waiting for that moment, and I'm trying to figure out the formula now, how to get that. I didn't, experiment with a lot of alcohol before the event, so maybe this would be it. But I still have some time. So okay, do you have any question at the moment for our guest? No. They will not be here, for next half year. So seize the opportunity now. No, okay. All right. So, Jess, regarding your experience in Techstars, so you saw a lot of startups and you focused, also on the fintech, and the fintech is also one of the areas that a lot of startups in Slovenia is here. What are your observations regarding this fintech area? Is this fintech still like a big hype that it was 5 years ago? What are your observations? What is happening in this fintech area?
So I think overall there became a lot of hype or noise around fintech because the markets are humongous. And I think that was one of the first things that hit me when I was stepping out of some of the other industries I'd been focused on, just looking at bond marketplaces, or just looking at the insurance industry, or just looking at the technology spend of a bank like Barclays and how much they put into their IT systems or budget for IT systems every year. And the numbers were just so much bigger than the budgets I was used to seeing, or the markets I was used to hearing about. So I think a lot of that is legit. I think the speed of adoption, when you look at the big banks and incumbents, to some extent they're still tripping over themselves, figuring out how to implement or how to roll out or take advantage of a lot of the new technologies that they want to be a customer for or that they want to partner with. And I'm sure, Alen, you can speak to some of that as well, but often they're interested and they want to be a customer for a startup, but it still takes them a while, or they're overly optimistic about how quickly they'll be able to get through procurement, or how quickly they'll be able to go from a pilot to a bigger enterprise deal. And so there have been some frustrations in those expectation setting with founders of companies that are kind of dependent on knowing cash flow and knowing those forecasts. I think the banks are getting smarter and they're improving. And for a lot of them, there's still a strong desire. And I think I saw personally Barclays make a lot of changes that were encouraging and very satisfying. But I think across the market, I'm sure plenty of startups are getting exhausted waiting for the big incumbents to make changes, and we'll probably be figuring out how to continue operating without being so dependent on somebody else's permission or license or approval or distribution. It's hard to find the right balance, but that's one dynamic I enjoy, just seeing how people cope with it.
Yeah. And what was the, let's say, the Techstars policy regarding when evaluating or assessing startups? Was the technology, was the team, was the business model? What was the, let's say, the most important part of the, what has to be like really, on the table to get accepted? What were the basic criteria?
We're obsessed with team. And so like I've read through thousands of applications over the years, obviously, for all the different programs. And the one thing that's the same, you'll hear if someone from Techstars is saying, here's the 5 criteria that we're looking, or 6 criteria we're looking at in applications. Team, 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 market, traction, product. But like, it's true. And when we obsess with team, it's like, okay, we're often trying to be psychologists, trying to understand, like, what are your motivations? What actually got you to start this company? Maybe not what's the big public story you tell, because it's a nice story, but like genuinely what made you want to throw your life into this? Why did you buddy up with the co-founders that you've chosen? Or why did you hire those people that you hired? Are you guys going to be able to stick together through the tough times? What's that dynamic? What makes you argue? How do you get through those challenges? How much do you trust each other? How equitable is the distribution of equity? Does it feel like everybody is motivated and incentivized to see this through? Or has the CTO been given 2%, and we just feel like they're going to bail the moment things get tough? So we're really, doing our best job to try to place psychologists around those questions, because the vast majority of companies we see fall apart, it's usually not because they couldn't get their technology to work. It's usually not because they couldn't get customers. It's usually because of co-founder issues. And either we wind up spending crazy amounts of time just trying to help people solve wanting to kill each other, or that company is actually going to explode and not survive because of those issues. So we will just spend vast majority of our energy and time analyzing the team. And sometimes you see applications where people are like, those are fluffy questions. How did you meet your co-founders? At the gym, on the playground, through work. And it's like just frustrating if people don't realize why we're trying to analyze these sorts of things and only put details around the product. It feels like we don't think, that you value your team either.
Yeah.
So,
what is the, approximate, ratio between, applications you get and the companies you received? What is the ratio?
Oh man, so it's a bit of a mix, because when you're applying to a program, people can choose to apply to multiple programs. It varies across how specifically that program is focused. I think the
London,
city programs like Techstars London is probably somewhere around 1,000 applications, and 10 companies ultimately will be selected. Probably 80 will be interviewed, probably 40 will be interviewed in the next round, and probably 20 will be interviewed in the final round. Probably 10 will be selected. I should add, I'm not with Techstars anymore. I keep saying we because it's been my life. It's hard to detach. But I'm just taking some time out. I'm not working anywhere right now.
Okay, okay, cool. We'll come to that later.
Okay.
Alen, so regarding this, team, these basic criteria, the motivation, you were among the first employees in Pleo. What is the chemistry in your team? How is your motivation, and how are those, let's say, criteria that Jess mentioned, sorted out in your company?
Yeah, I think fintech is a bit specific, and I think because it's actually very hard to do. Fintech startups are very hard to replicate. You need a lot of experience. You need experienced founders. So when it comes to founders, it helps that people know what they're doing because they're handling money, they're handling compliance, they're handling a lot of regulation that comes with any fintech startup in general. And for us, actually, it was very important that we had co-founders that had a lot of experience with fintech. So they both worked in Tradeshift, which is a Danish procurement software. So they had a lot of experience in fintech-related services. Jeppe, our CEO, was the CFO there, so he knew the pain that Pleo is solving. So he was solving his own pain, to say. I think both Jeppe and Nico, which are the co-founders, had really great chemistry, and they both have really great experience, and they both bring a lot to the table. I think our first year with Pleo, since before they got an investment from founders, and that's even before I met them, has been just putting all the puzzles together, just figuring out the partners. We work with a lot of partners. We work with partners for processing. We work with partners for issuing cards, regulators, compliance. So there's like a lot of infrastructure that needs to be built. So yeah, I would say if you have experience and if you know what you're doing in fintech space, it's pretty apparent that you're onto something great. And if you come through with this, I think especially like 3 years ago, there was not a lot of plug-and-play solutions. I think now in Europe, especially with PSD2 and stuff, there's a lot more noise because it's a lot easier right now to just say, okay, we want to have a card, we want to have a prepaid card. So that's why you see in UK, there's like, at one point there was like 10 challenger banks last year. I think the challenge right now is basically growth for a lot of those companies. But to go back to our team, I joined very early. We built the team around, I think 5 to 10 people in the beginning. In the first year, that was actually just building the product, and at the same time, I was in the commercial part, the only person there, kind of creating like our positioning, telling the people who we are. We were very active actually very early on. That's not very common for a lot of startups. So a lot of people who work in growth will tell you, before you have a product or before you had a product market fit, it doesn't make sense to have marketing or growth. Whereas in our case, it actually proved to be a good decision, and because we just basically applied for like competitions and we got a lot of press, and that means we got a lot of early stage signups, and that basically was a great indicator for later when we went fundraising, and that's why we attracted high-profile investors, because we just basically could say, okay, we have 1,000 companies waiting to get started with Pleo, actually. Okay.
Maybe before you go into details, can you explain us really simple, what is Pleo actually doing? What is the service?
Yeah, so Pleo is a company spending solution that provides company cards to employees, and it basically automates a lot of expense reports and booking keeping related tasks. So basically, we want to make company spending as simple as possible, but at the same time, for the finance people, we want to make it as easy as possible to control and maintain, because that's quite a big hassle for the end user as an employee, because right now, when you buy something for work, you have to keep the receipts, you have to take pictures, you have to take it to your accountant, and then the accountant has to put it in manually. So we basically automate everything from the purchase to the accounting software. Okay.
And so your target, let's say, market are what? Not small enterprises probably, but middle and bigger enterprises, right?
Yeah. So we kind of started very size and industry agnostic, because everybody has that pain. what we kind of focused on when we kind of learned when people started signing up for Pleo and started using it in beta. We were in beta for quite a while because we were building the product and to create as much as value as possible. But we saw most value is when people have a lot of employees on the road and a lot of people who basically do expenses, right? And normally those industries would be in like creative industries, or when people have a lot of salespeople, or retail. And so we kind of focused on the segment which is like 10 to 200 employees. We don't focus on smaller companies anymore. We started off, but we didn't see that we could provide enough value for them. And there's a lot of services that started to pop up. And we kind of started from the start to have basically a financial model in place. So a lot of fintech startups would be free. Well, we have a subscription model. And yeah, a lot of smaller companies are not willing to pay for a subscription because they'd be like, oh, we don't have a lot of expenses. And then bigger companies would have infrastructural differences and always different setups with their ERP solutions, so they're not very suitable for us. So it's basically a plug-and-play solution for like 10 to 200 employees, and yeah, that's been our main growth. And it's only in 2 markets at the moment, so Denmark and United Kingdom.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so this market segment is, I mean, pretty big. If you also look the Slovenian, let's say, you know, the structure of the companies, you know, this segment represent, I don't know if majority, but like a west part of the company. So this segment is quite crowded with all the services and all the solutions for them. And so obviously the positioning is really important and really crucial. So this was your part, you know, to position your company and service in a right manner, so the target segment perceives the value or gets the value, or gets what you are trying to solve them. So do you have any advice, you know, how to position a company or a product in a really crowded space, like, you know, some sort of fintech products for these segments are? What would be your advices, let's say, if there are any?
Yeah. So when we started launching, there was actually no competition in our space, and that's, I mean, in our markets. When we kind of built our first website, it was a big novelty, so people were quite excited about it. So you would have on one side just credit cards from banks, basically, that are corporate credit cards with no software, or you would have software on the other side, which is the expense report solution software. It's very boring in general. And we kind of blended this together. So we were quite a unique proposition. So we got a lot of traction, like early interest traction, just because press was excited that people won't have to do expense reports anymore. And yeah, and that's basically, a lot of people can relate to this pain, and a lot of people just saw a lot of value just coming to our website, right? But before we basically launched, we did a lot of interviews with potential customers, both in Denmark and in UK. And then I think we were very fortunate also that we had the founders who had a lot of experience, especially from the CFO perspective. So yeah, it's, as I said before, like fintech is pretty complicated, but when you even come to the B2B space, it gets even more complicated because the compliance gets more complicated, because the workflows get more complicated. Mm-hmm. And I think, yeah, since we launched, I think we're in business now for a year and something, and we have, I think, 1,200 companies using it in those 2 markets, and we're growing quite a bit. So there's still a lot of potential out there, even though there's a lot of competition popping up in our space, and that's due to a lot of services are easier to build now because the infrastructure in place is a lot more open for a lot of startups.
Cool. And you, yeah, just...
Can I confess, I didn't turn in any of my expenses for 2013. I got so overwhelmed, I just completely gave up. Then I got a company credit card the next year and I did a better job. But I decided that year my mental health was more important than my hundreds of receipts. I just couldn't take it.
just a comment, maybe from your side. I mean, you see a lot of companies that is, you know, trying to aim in this segment, and position themselves like, you know, really adding value. And every company is like, we add value, we solve this problem, this and this and this. So what are your observations regarding, you know, or how to stand up from this crowd? I mean, it's getting crowdier and crowdier, as you said. The conditions, the basic conditions are there, the technology is there, the basic setup is there. So the space is getting crowdier and crowdier. So what to do? I mean, how to solve this?
I'd say first of all is understanding your target market as specifically as possible and as well as possible, because still too many companies, I think, feel like everyone is our market. Everyone who's a parent, everyone who's a designer, everyone who wears shoes. Like, and when you hear that everyone who, it's like, oh, probably I'm not gonna like how the rest of the sentence goes. And I think the more specific you can get and the more you can understand your piece of that market where you're gonna begin, the more you can figure out how to appeal to that group and state your value proposition in a way that resonates with those people. And I think too many people are afraid to have that narrow focus because you feel like, oh, but that's such a small market. We need our numbers to be big. We need to show that we're for this whole big piece of the pie. And I think that's when a lot of messaging gets too watered down, or people start to lose their identity, or your message doesn't really resonate or speak to anyone compellingly because you're trying to appeal to such a big group. I also think the value and the art of business-to-business sales is becoming more and more appreciated within the startup community. And I think the way that you try to appeal to consumers is often just so different to doing a large enterprise sale. And I saw this a lot with fintech, but also we have a program focused on, in Australia, focused on the defense industry. So again, if you're trying to like sell into big defense industry players or energy companies, yeah, or banks, like the art of how to do kind of old school business to business sales and build those relationships and get those internal champions within a large corporation and give them the materials that will equip them to be your advocate internally. Like a lot of the startups that I saw doing really well in those spaces were the ones that had nailed the art of B2B sales, more so than just obsessing with your product and assuming that, you know, a bunch of outreach and, I don't know, hack together sales messages will work for an enterprise deal.
Do you think, you know, or, you know, this is the question for both of you, is it possible to have like a good and effective B2B sales without really senior and well-connected personnel on board?
Should I start?
Yeah.
Depends. I in our case, yes, because most of our leads come from inbound. That means they just come to our website and they show interest in Pleo, and we have a very high touch model in Pleo, so we really focus on getting our customers activated and happy. So it's not really selling per se, but it's more getting them fully onboarded into Pleo. Because yeah, we have to go through the compliance process. We have to get them to issue their cards, to set up their accounting. So it's a very high touch model. So for us, we don't need like really experienced people who come with a Rolodex of clients, and we basically can, like our clients vary. As I said, we're like very agnostic, so we would have very different businesses. But yeah, for enterprise deals, it's good to have like industry specific people who have experience, but also the know-how, but also the connections.
What do you mean by high touch approach? I mean, what is the high touch? What do you mean by that?
So most companies strive, especially in our segment, most companies would strive to have a very low touch approach. Basically, they would say, okay, here's an advertisement, go to our website, sign up, start a trial, and go into the product. And then we're going to have the messaging to figure it out itself. If you're a high value client, we're going to send a salespeople your way, and you're going to have a meeting, right? Pleo has a very lucrative model, but it's also a very important strategy for us since the get-go that we wanted to have our early customers, and that's now a lot of clients, but we wanted to have all of them very happy. And we believe that this is very important because once people will start spending through Pleo, they will never switch, and we have a negative churn. And that's something that you don't see in a lot of B2B startups where you can just go in the product because another email marketing software will show up and it will be cheaper and they will switch. Whereas with Pleo, we commit to them so much because we have a business model that can support that because we charge our users, whereas a lot of competition will be a lot cheaper and maybe even free. And we're willing to invest a lot. And our net promoter score because of that is around 80. So industry benchmark for like corporate cards would be around 0 or even negative for banking services. So that's why we really invested in this high touch model. So it goes from account management to customer success, really being with clients and be very, very proactive on getting them activated and started.
So, but what does it mean really practically? I mean, high touch versus low touch. So,
Yeah.
what does it mean? I mean, if someone comes to your website, how does this onboarding process looks like really, practically? So to really see the difference between, the first low touch approach you described so vividly, and compare it to your, let's say, high touch approach. What is the difference? So what are the concrete steps? What are you doing differently? So can you just explain it?
Yeah, so when people sign up on our website, we don't allow them to get in the product. And that's due to the fact because we're available only in 2 markets and we have a lot of demand. I think around 300 companies sign up every week for Pleo, and we cannot engage with all of them. And a lot of small businesses also sign up for Pleo, and we don't really see a lot of value for them. So we only engage with customers that make a lot of sense for us. We basically willingly made a decision to do that. And with that, we basically just invite them in for a meeting where we basically also assess their business. So it's kind of like almost a bit of consulting where we basically can help you guys help companies get started, and then also see what will benefit most for them, and also make sure that they go through our compliance process. So Pleo, when you sign up for Pleo, you cannot just create cards. You have to basically give a lot of your documents about your shareholders, and you have to do KYCs for each of them. And we automated that process in the 2 markets. That's why we focus also on the 2 markets for now. And it's very important for us to touch and assess which kind of companies have a legit case in using Pleo, because with financial services, there's also a lot of weird cases where a lot of companies would want to sign up and use it for different ways, not as intended for employees' expenses.
Okay.
And that from there on, we basically help them get started. We set up a meeting when they say yes, when they confirm that they will start using Pleo. We set up a meeting with customer success where we basically create the first integration they have. We help them get started. They could do it themselves. We offer them. If they're tech savvy, they would, but a lot of financial people actually in bigger companies or external accountants very much appreciate that. And to help them order cards, and then when they order cards, help them, just understand all the use cases that Pleo can be used in. So, that's the high touch model. And if we basically wanted to say, let's open doors, let's get everybody in, we would have the top funnel a lot bigger, but then we would have the retention a lot lower. Whereas our case was, let's have active clients and have very happy clients.
Okay. So what approximately is the, let's say, the rate of, how many these applications do you decline? I mean, if you have 200 per week, how many of them you decline approximately? I mean, I understand if you can talk.
Yeah. So we don't like decline. We don't say no. We just don't engage, or we tell them, that, for example, if it's a small company, we just don't engage and tell them that we are building this product for bigger companies, and that we will let them know if we will decide to go into the freelancer segment. So that's one way to do it. The second way is just like, if there are companies from outside of our region, we just don't interact, because we also say when they sign up, like, it's not available yet, but we'll keep you posted if something opens, and they go into our CRM system.
Okay.
We engage with, I would say, with approximately half of those.
Okay, so you're now leading this, growth group, right? Department, or how it's already a department, or it's group? How are you organized?
Yeah, it wasn't a department. I was the only person doing like inbound for a while. Now it's kind of a department. We're like 3 people right now, but we have a lot of account managers. So the account managers are kind of in that growth group.
Okay. So you are managing all this conversation with these companies that feed by manually, or is this automated in a way that, it's done by some chatbot or anything?
Yeah, we have a pretty advanced stack in sales and marketing. So we could see on the email if this is a high potential deal, and then based on that, we would push them automatically with a meeting with account managers, so with the salesperson. So there's like no touch if the lead is qualified for us. Cool. And we use quite a lot of different services to help us that, but basically people just put in their email when we get a lot of details and help them through that. So we don't interact manually, no. I think what I see a lot is that a lot of businesses actually have questions right now. So they would, especially bigger companies, they would not just go into a trial or a demo. They would engage in chat actually. So in that sense, yes, there's customer support, helping them and then pushing them to the account managers. I see that quite a lot more. And then there's also people who call us, and then we also engage with them manually. But other than that, no.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Do you have any? Yeah, Martin. Yeah, I know. I know. I can count on you. Martin, the question.
I've got 2 questions. First, the one for Jess. Going back to how much they concentrate on the team and the team members, and how do you recognize the right team? What are the correct questions to those, the correct answers to those questions? Where did you meet him or her, the other team members? What makes you think that a particular team is perfect and will bring the company forward?
All right, fair question. And I will say there's no perfect answers, because we just want to hear real story. And when we're having any interview, it's more of a conversation, right? We just want to get to know what's going on, and we're totally making a subjective assessment where not everything can be data-driven and quantified, right? You're going on gut instinct, and it is imperfect, and that's life. So I think the questions that wind up being the most helpful, like when I'm having conversations, I love understanding, like, yeah, what actually made you put aside what you were doing before and dedicate yourself to solving this. I love understanding, yeah, how did the co-founders meet, but there's no perfect answer. I could maybe give more imperfect answers, like, if you can
maybe
tell
examples. Maybe examples.
Sure.
Maybe a big mistake that you've made.
Yeah, I'm trying to think what mistakes now. Like, sometimes I remember one company where they had recently brought in a new CEO. It was not one of the co-founders, but they felt they needed somebody with more experience to take over the reins as CEO. But as they were speaking and just answering our questions about the market, about the product, you could tell they didn't trust the new CEO, and the old CEO kept wanting to correct things and change the answers and interrupt. And so you're just judging that dynamic. Like, do they trust each other? Do people in certain roles seem to have a fair background or expertise or value to bring to that role? Understanding that it might change, but if you sense they don't trust the CEO, that's a big red flag, right? That should be to anyone. If there's major gaps in the team, I love to ask, what will your next hire be? Like, at the point that you're bringing someone else into the team, what will that hire be? It's kind of the same way of asking what's your biggest gap in the team, but it's in a way that doesn't make it sound so negative. I think people are more honest when you just say, what will your next hire be? And it's fine, everybody's gonna have gaps in the team, that's fine. But I think we used to wind up investing in companies that didn't have the technical expertise themselves. I think that's extremely rare now, because you want to know that the team is going to be able to execute and get things done and not be sitting around waiting to find the magical CTO unicorn that is going to be as passionate about what they're building as the rest of the founders. I mentioned when we were chatting earlier, sometimes you see very complicated equity structures. Maybe you see that the technical side has been outsourced to a company that is maybe now 40% shareholder, and maybe you see that the CTO of the startup is also the CEO of that technical outsourced company running a number of other projects that they're still, stakeholders in. And that can get super messy. At what point is that CTO going to become full-time or going to become only dedicated to the startup? And we're not sitting there trying to rip anyone apart or trying to mess up other businesses going on, but you just look at that usually and feel like, this is gonna get too messy. Like, that person is never actually gonna leave that software company of 100 employees. And if they do, having that 40%, like, let's talk about how this equity is distributed. It's more about finding red flags, or finding that as you're chatting, you just fall in love with the company you're chatting with. Like, you just fall in love with the founders, their story. You want to understand what is your unique background or perspective or experience that you're bringing to the company you're building. And Alen kind of touched on this earlier in terms of, in fintech, it's usually winds up being relevant that the founders need to have some background or expertise in that piece of financial services. But whatever it is you're doing, maybe you didn't work in that industry before, in property, in fashion, in retail, but what is your unique perspective or insight that other people aren't acting on that's going to help make you successful? We're just trying to understand and figure those things out. Otherwise, in a crowded market, it's hard to believe that you're going to be the winners, until we can see and feel that with you. I hope that helps, even if it's kind of...
Yeah, okay. Cool. And a question for Alen. I like the idea very much, but how exactly does the accounting software then get the information you collect?
Through their API. So we basically, I don't know how is it here actually right now, but in UK and in Denmark, you have the market leader in cloud accounting software, and they would have very, very developer-friendly APIs. So there's a lot of tools for invoicing, expenses, just basically everything that you can think of built on top of them. So it's actually a very, very big value proposition for finance teams, not much for the end user. So yeah, we're kind of opening up to just integrate our services into more services as we go.
So right now, your system works with just one accounting software?
No, we work with several, but not with every. We don't work with all the ERP systems yet.
All right. Any other question? Here and there. I'm glad you warmed up.
All right. My question is for both of you. What was your peak of your stress level during your journey, and how did you overcome it? Thanks.
Stress level?
Yeah.
So what was the most stressful situation or something like
Yeah,
that?
exactly. Something, or stressful level of the journey itself. Like
Okay.
the most critical part of your journey, and how did you overcome that?
Okay.
I don't know. Danes are very relaxed people. They have a very high quality of life. They have a very great, basically, work-life balance. So living there, I never experienced stress, to be honest. I experienced it here quite a bit, but not there. I mean, there's stress in certain situations, but I think what I found very fascinating with our founders is that they've been very calm. They're basically adults. They know what they're doing. So even when we were just 4 people, I remember when we didn't have basically anything yet on the market. We were talking about things that are happening today, and we were talking about it with all the seriousness. And the plans were very ambitious. So at that point, you get a lot more calm because you trust them, and I think it's really important to have founders that you can really rely on and make sure, especially, we are a company that's dealing with finances, and a lot of things can go wrong, but as I said before, if you have domain experts, it's very helpful. So, yeah.
Can I add a sub question? Maybe stress is also related to, let's say, responsibility and to, let's say, some sort of expectations of or maybe your metrics. So what is your responsibility, and with this responsibility related metrics or expectations of your position or your job?
Yeah, so it's been top of the funnel, basically leads, so companies that show interest in Pleo. And we've been very fortunate that, as I've talked before, that we kind of engaged with customers before we even had a product. We also applied for this Pioneer conference, and we won that conference. So we got a lot of press, we got a lot of interest. So we were very fortunate that basically a lot of salespeople, account managers, they came in, they just basically had a backlog of companies that they just waited to be called. And that's not a situation that a lot of startups are in. So that was a very strong indicator of a product market fit. And then we found more challenges that worked for us. And it's been just basically when you're on the growth curve, everything seems great, right? And you don't see any real challenges. I mean, you don't see any problems. You see challenges, but you see them in a positive way. So I think from that perspective, we have such a strong product market fit that we're only in 2 markets, and we're even our competition is in whole Europe, and we're in 2 markets, but we have more traction than them. That also kind of for opening up new markets. That basically, that's a good signal for us. So we're actually not that stressed about that. But my main metric in our team is just basically the number of qualified leads and then the number of active companies.
Okay. Cool. Jess, back to you, and stress-related question.
Yeah, I'm used to operating, as probably most of us are, at quite a high level of stress. So if I'm not at a high level of stress, I'll probably take more on until I am, unfortunately. 12 years ago, I had a weird summer job as a tour guide around Scotland. I was a 20-year-old American that had been in Scotland for 9 months. And they would give me groups of 40 or 50 people, and I was responsible for them for 10 days. And I had to give the talks on the coach, like tell them all about Scotland's history, every day give like walking tours of cities I'd never been to. I was just pretending I knew what was going on, and I read the book Scotland for Dummies every night and wrote note cards for myself to give my talks the next day. So I know this seems unrelated, but that was probably the highest stress level of my life. Everything else has been manageable. I was also completely on my own for that job, except sometimes I would ask the bus driver to help me out, like when he dropped us off at the castle in the north of Scotland in Inverness, and I didn't know which building was the castle. I was like, Kevin, which way do I walk? And it's funny because so often in my Techstars experiences, I would have flashbacks to this, and I usually felt like even though the job was seemingly unrelated, it actually had the most in common with what my life was like. And so I don't know if you guys have found this, that jobs you had when you were 18 or 19 or 20, like, shaped your character or were such high stress, and you just tell yourself, I got through that, I can get through anything. I think how I got through the Techstars stress was definitely my colleagues. Like, some people have a big separation of work life, personal life, home life. Mine is all one big blurry like circle. It's all the same. My colleagues were my best friends. They were my family. I even lived with some of them sometimes. And so just that feeling of camaraderie and like I've got their back and they've got my back made me and us together, I think, take a lot more risks and be able to accomplish much more, because it wasn't about looking backward and blaming, you did this wrong, this was your mistake. It was so easy for any of us, but especially me, to be like, okay, I screwed this up. I didn't realize these visas were going to be so difficult. Help. How can we fix this? And I recently dyed my hair for the first time, but I used to dedicate every new white hair to a startup visa in another country that we were entering, and that was probably boringly what gave me the most stress the last few years.
Cool. Thanks. Alen, how is this, separation between work and, friend areas in Denmark? Is this like similar than Jess explained? So is this like one blurry area, or is this separation more like sharp?
I think for Danes it's very sharp. For the rest of us who work in IT, it's different. So yeah, most of my friends are people who I worked with, because yeah, Danes are known as a northern country. Like, people are a bit more cold. They're not very open to meeting new friends. And I read a nice saying, like, you're gonna make a Danish friend, but you're never gonna meet his friends. And they have very close-knit circles that they kind of have since high school, and then they really stick with them. So yeah, but yeah, as in a startup, of course, there's always long hours, and you become friends along the way.
Okay, cool. And there was another question there.
The question is for both of you, but I will refer on something Alen said, and he mentioned that they were lucky having founders that knew what we're doing, knowing all the regulations and stuff. And in my opinion, the IT guys are not so much into that. And how big of a problem is that for startups? And do you have some concrete example? Maybe Jess will be more competent to answer that, since you were at Techstars and you've seen a lot of startups.
I'll admit, it was hard for me to start taking regulation so seriously when I made the transition into the fintech world, 2014, because regulation had always been this word that you kind of ignore, and yeah, whatever, you're fine. Ask forgiveness, not permission. Then I started working in financial services and realized it wasn't such a funny afterthought. So I think, and some of our founders were definitely operating in areas where they were pressing the UK government for more specific regulation and more specific decisions, because you're on the cutting edge often of your industry, something where regulation is not always clear yet. And when the regulator, we would host them for a session so they could answer questions in person. And whenever they were like, we're still developing that, we'll let you know how that turns out. The founder was like, I'm gonna go to jail if I get this wrong. So I really need more clarity from you today, not in 6 months. And once I realized how much more was at stake, whether it's the humongous fines or the personal liability or actually going to jail is not such a remote possibility, I've realized some industries' regulation is, gonna have to be a little bit more at the forefront. But I don't think any of us are looking to make regulation, the first topic of conversation for every business. We mostly acknowledge it's not the most fun topic, but in fintech, when you have people that can navigate that well for you inside the company, it's a huge advantage.
Yeah. Agree. Alen, any comment to that? No. No.
Not really. I mean, I mentioned a lot of things
you
about
still ask for forgiveness, not for permission, right?
No.
Okay. Any other question? No. All right. Yeah, Luca.
What are the plans for this year?
I love that question. Then I can explain how I wound up here. So I made my decision a little over a year ago. Last March, I said within Techstars I wanted to finish through December and work 9 more months like crazy. And then at the end of December, I was going to, press pause and wrap up that adventure. So my first goal for this year was to go to Antarctica. And I went in February on Valentine's Day. I thought I'll find a penguin. That will be a nice Valentine's Day. So that was February. I had a good time. If anybody's looking to go to Antarctica, let me know. I'll point you in the right direction. I made 3 goals, I should say. Second goal is I wanted to buy a house in Slovenia. I'd never been before, but I've confessed.
None of them did take you seriously on point 2. So tell them that you are serious regarding the point 2, please.
Yeah, it's legit. It's on LinkedIn. I'm not lying. So I read an article in the EasyJet magazine 2 years ago, and this article talked about how in certain parts of the country, people live to be over 100 years old, way more than the average. And this article just stuck in my mind. I had a relative who was 104, so I was trying to pay attention. What can I do? And so after reading this article, thanks to EasyJet, I just started Googling more and more about Slovenia. And the more I Googled and the more articles I read, I just thought, wow, it sounds so beautiful. Look at all these photos. Google Images can't be wrong. And then at the same time, I would hear friends mention they'd just gotten back from a trip to Slovenia and mention what an amazing time they had. So, it starts out as this crazy thing, but then it just kind of adds up. And I thought, screw it. This is not an investment committee decision. This is just me. And I've decided I just think it's going to go up here, and I'm not in place to be buying or looking at property in London, and I'm not really attached to US in my current life in the same way. I thought it would be fun to just try somewhere new. So all my friends have been laughing at me. Some are supportive and some are mostly just amused. But I actually booked this trip to have 10 days with me in a rental car, driving around the country, figuring out where I wanted to try to buy a small house. So then I got connected to Urban a few weeks ago, and we chatted and found out this event was happening tonight. So I thought, perfect, I'll make sure that's in my route. And if anybody is from Piran, I would love to chat with you afterwards. And my third goal is learning to draw latte art, because I've never been artistic, and when I thought, do I want to learn oil painting, watercolor? No, I'll just decorate a latte. That would be fun. So I'll try to use all different parts of my brain with adventures, property, lattes, and then in discussions about joining someone and starting a new VC fund, also not a joke, at the end of the year. But he knows where I'm at in terms of just taking my time with these adventures now.
Cool. All right. Thanks. Any comment on that? Point 1, point 2, point 3? Yeah. No.
Anyone from Piran?
No. Not the right community for that.
Okay. It's So thank you for having me.
But the next question related to the goals, Alen, what are the plans for the Pleo? I heard you have high, let's say, high plans, high goals for this year. So can you tell us more about it?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, in the past year, we got a lot of companies on board. They're very happy. And subsequently, we kind of saw that there's a lot of interest from all around the world in Pleo. Everybody hates expenses. So our plan is to expand geographically. Why we expand geographically country by country is because we comply by local regulations, but also it's our decision, as I mentioned before, to go very deep in the market and understand the financial system, how the tax works, etc., etc. And that's why we took a different route than a lot of financial startups and our competitions, which are basically wide across Europe. And that's why I believe we have such a strong attraction. So our goal is to launch market by market in 3 to 5 new countries this year. And we are around 50 people right now working in Copenhagen, and the plan is to at least double this team this year and then see what happens going forward.
Cool. In which year the Slovenian market is on your roadmap?
We actually have a lot of sign-ups from Slovenia. It's quite interesting, but I don't even know how to say expense reports in Slovenian. So I hope this event will be in English actually, because it's really hard to pitch Pleo. But no, I mean, we don't have it. We don't have it like set in stone which markets are we going to open. There's definitely like bigger markets to go after, and which are not so cash heavy. So where card acceptance is higher, especially the Nordic markets. So that's going to be our aims.
What is the difference in the card acceptance ratio between, I don't know, Nordic countries and, I don't know, Spain or Italy, where I suppose that the card ratio is pretty low?
Yeah.
Just to have a feeling, because I don't know what are the numbers.
I don't know the statistics, but I know from my own experience that in my 2.5 years in Denmark, I never had a need to use the ATM. I don't even know how Danish coins look like, because basically everywhere cards are accepted. So there's a lot of services where you can get a terminal like iZettle, or in UK like Square, where basically every small shop can just set up something for free. And I think the infrastructure in Nordics is extremely great. I mean, extremely advanced when it comes to like payment technology. There's a lot of payment technology companies that, I think it's really like cutting edge when it comes to that, especially in the Nordics, like Sweden and Norway and Denmark.
Okay.
And in other countries, like you can use Pleo and you can take out cash, but then we have to kind of cater that in a different way, and it's also not something that we have at the moment done very well, because most of the people buy with their cards. But the interesting fact is that card payments went up in the last 10 years significantly, because if you look at 10 years ago, like most of the things were paid by invoices. So we even see right now in UK that there are companies who pay rent through their cards. They pay events through their cards. So it's a lot easier to basically swipe a card right now and pay for basically anything. Mm-hmm. So that's also our decision why we went with cards in the first place. Okay.
So where do you see this trend? I mean, a lot of things and opportunities in fintech that are in, I don't know, contactless payment cards. So where do you see where this industry is going? What is your, let's say, feeling, or what are the trends, and on the other side, what are the threats, or what are the, let's say, pitfalls that is holding the development of this industry behind, or let's say?
Yeah, I mean, with Pleo, we don't say we're a card, and that's because we see card as basically just an object, how you make a payment, and we don't engage in advancing our card. So what we believe in is that basically, you know, payments will become just easy to make. Either it's with your phone or either with your card, whatever is the easiest. Either it's with your virtual cards. So we also do virtual cards with Pleo. So we don't actually care what is the end object. It just happens to be a card at the moment because it's used by most of the people. It doesn't run out of the battery and it's weatherproof, right? So it's very, like, it's everywhere. So what we are focused on with Pleo is what happens before and what happens after the payment. And I think that's where most of the value is being added by fintechs. I think where innovation will happen in the car, so basically in this object that will do the payment, will happen with either MasterCard or Visa, which are the biggest issuers of cars. Whereas the innovation that we can provide and where we add the most value is what happens before and after.
Cool. Jess, would you add anything to these trends that are in the horizon? What do you think? What is your crystal ball saying?
I am not paying a lot of attention to the trends right now, so I think ask me in September.
All right. Just try to refocus you from Piran to Maribor.
I
right?
know. Can I share? When I messaged across Techstars and announced just internally, it's about 180 people working in Techstars around the world. And when I messaged to just say confidentially, I'm going to be wrapping up end of the year, here's my 3 goals for next year. 2 people from the company wrote me back and said, I also want to buy a house in Slovenia. And they were Connor Murphy, who's our managing director of the...
Berlin?
Yeah, in Berlin, partnered with SAP, and Sunil in Canada, who runs Techstars Toronto. And it was because both of them came to the conference last year and fell in love with the country then. So there's a lot of love in Techstars right now for Slovenia. And,
we have to monetize that.
Yeah, and that conference definitely is like making its way around everybody's hearts.
Cool.
So I'm happy to finally be able to be here. And yeah, maybe I will change my location. Who knows?
All right. Or maybe add additional location to already existing one. Okay. All right. We are wrapping up. So last round of the questions from the audience. If someone has anything, Martin.
Maybe this is a perfect question for the end. You've been, for Jeff, of course, you've been to all these different countries. Techstars is in all these different countries. What differences do you see between the UK and Berlin and South Africa and so on in the quality of startups or the dynamics within teams or whatever?
So I'd say every community is a bit different, and each of the programs is open globally. So each of the programs is not just working with startups in that ecosystem, but the mentors and investment community of that ecosystem. I'd say one thing I saw in common across London, Cape Town, Adelaide in Australia, Berlin, Paris, is just that each ecosystem tends to be really highly impacted by a handful of individuals that are kind of the community organizers. And those were people that I tended to work quite closely with in the early days to help figure out how were we going to be a value add in that ecosystem? How are we going to spread the word effectively, and how could we support and add to what was going on? So I just thought it was interesting how much a few key individuals and a few key events or conferences really do impact any ecosystem out there, whether it's in the super earlier stages or whether it's been going for years and years and years. I probably saw more similarities than I did differences, to be honest. Like the differences, we would have to adapt the program to, fit the industry we were focused on, often more so than the location itself. Like the location itself, we're adjusting things like startup visa process or how we support people finding housing, how people commute to the office, like, you know, quite boring things to talk about. What time of day the mentor hours are going to start. Do people wake up early here? Do people expect 10 o'clock is an early start? You know, some cities it might be 8 a.m. Other cities, nobody would attend if you said 8 a.m. So, yeah, it was more like the logistical things that were different community to community, but I think I saw a lot of similar spirits and ties and vibes really in each ecosystem, which was nice, and everywhere was so welcoming. I think I just tried to make it clear we were just trying to add and contribute to what was already happening there, but not try to replace or step on any toes of other startup support or ecosystem efforts that were ongoing. So I think that kind of attitude made it nicer for all of us and easier to blend into each new place we were headed.
Cool. Maybe just for the end, do you have a really great overview of the, let's say, whole hemisphere of the ecosystems? Is there any specific one that is really popping up, or is really like super emerging and developing super fast compared to others? Or would you point out any ecosystem, or what are your thoughts? Except the Slovenian one.
I know. I'll leave those comments till I've soaked up a bit more here. I'd say people probably underestimate how much is happening across Africa and how big some of those markets are. I was quite focused on fintech there because our program was fintech, but we set up specifically in South Africa because the CEO of Barclays Africa really wanted more innovation that was specific to emerging markets. And I think a lot of the payments infrastructure, or really just any of the infrastructure, is quite different, but people tend to talk about Africa as if it's all one place with the same characteristics. And I know I'm even guilty of that as well, right? It's hard to figure out the right reference point. And B, tend to talk about countries in Africa as if everything is behind and catching up to where everybody else is. And I think what's quite funny is that when you're there, whether you're in Ghana or Kenya or Johannesburg, Cape Town, Nigeria I didn't get to, but just would learn a lot from other people. Like, they consider themselves, and so much of their technology is actually ahead of things that we're still developing, like mobile payments, being able to pay so easily on whether it's for bills or at checkout points, at shops. And so some of it is that they've leapfrogged, like, because they didn't have all the same development steps as other places. Often they've just built straight to mobile and leapfrogged a lot of stuff that we're stuck with from legacy infrastructure. But just recognizing those misperceptions made me question a lot of other kind of misperceptions that I probably had when going into any other locations. Like Dubai, I just had no idea what to expect initially. That city is crazy. But anyways, we'll leave that for another time.
All right, thanks. Alen, I leave the word, the ending to you. So what are your, let's say, so plans? Okay, we heard the plans for the Pleo. Will you return? Will you stay there? What are your plans? So just, maybe a little more personal questions for the end.
Sound like my mom?
No,
I kind of decided a while ago that, it's really hard to make plans, I guess. And spontaneously I kind of ended up in Denmark, and spontaneously I ended up in Pleo. And ever since I was just like going in, day out, and growing the company. And now it's at the stage where, you see this huge potential before you, and you of course want to see it through, how it will happen. So I don't have any immediate plans. I see there's a lot of potential still. I think I kind of learned a lot, especially about specific industries, specifically about growth, and I think I can contribute, I think at any place basically now. But if I'm gonna move back to Slovenia, I don't know. I like it here. Maybe I'll buy a house.
What would be the potential argument to come back to Slovenia? I sound like your mom, I guess, for the second time. But what would that be, like a crazy idea, or old future group regrouping around the different idea, ground-shaking idea? Can you imagine? What would be the thing, the argument that you say, I'll get back?
Yeah, I think it's when you live abroad, especially when in a country that like Denmark, where the language is different, where basically most people are Danes, it's hard to feel as part of a country as you do here. But at the same time, looking at from your personal perspective, it's a rational decision to stay there because it gives you all this opportunity. Danes are very innovation focused. They're focused. Like a lot of people look up to Denmark, like and say, "Oh, this is a country that all countries should be like." So it's a very rational decision to stay there for long term. But I don't know. Let's see where the future takes me. I think there's, as I said before, I think there's actually a lot of potential in Slovenia, also within tech. I think looking at it now from the perspective of the Danish tech market, I feel like there's a lot of solutions built for small and medium-sized businesses, and I believe in a lot in this region, the Central European region. I feel like there's a lot of potential, basically just building basic stuff that is for small and medium-sized businesses, even for bigger businesses. I feel like a lot of systems that are used here are very legacy systems. So I think you can actually localize quite a lot of things. I have an open eye on that to see if there's any potential here. Yeah, so that would potentially be interesting in the future.
Cool. All right, you didn't exactly answer my question, but okay, I'll leave this for the debate later. Okay, so this was the last question. One big applause for our both guests. Thank you for your thoughts. Please, yeah.